In the pre-dawn blackness of October 16, 1946, a strange and heavy silence fell over the city of Nuremberg. Inside the stone walls of the Palace of Justice, the sentence handed down by the world was about to be carried out. 10 of the most powerful and feared men of the Third Reich, architects of a global war and unimaginable atrocities, were led one by one to the gallows. But the story taught in history class often ends there, with the sharp snap of a rope. The truth of what happened next, in the hours and days that followed, is a far more grim and desperate tale. It reveals a terrifying problem the Allies faced, a problem that would echo decades later in 2011 when America had to decide the fate of Osama bin Laden's body. What do you do with the world's most hated corpses? The night was already steeped in chaos. Of the 11 men sentenced to hang, one had cheated the hangman. Just hours before the executions, Hermann Goering, Hitler's chosen successor and the head of the Luftwaffe, bit down on a glass vial of potassium cyanide he had hidden away. He died not by the judgment of his enemies, but by his own hand, a final act of defiance. His suicide sent a shockwave through the prison, but the executions were ordered to proceed. The man tasked with carrying out the sentences was Master Sergeant John C. Woods. He was an American Army executioner who carried himself with a grim professionalism, but Woods held a dark secret. He had lied about his experience. He was not the expert hangman he claimed to be. This deception would have horrifying consequences. The gallows itself was built incorrectly. The trapdoor was too small, meaning some of the condemned men would strike the edge as they fell, leading to slow, agonizing deaths by strangulation instead of a quick, clean breaking of the neck. The first to the gallows, Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop, dangled for 10 minutes before he expired. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, a man who had sent millions to their deaths without a second thought, struggled against the rope for a staggering 24 minutes. An American correspondent who witnessed the event would later write that the executions were a grim and gruesome affair. It was not the clean hand of justice, it had the bloody feel of revenge. But as the 10 bodies were finally laid out side by side on the floor of the prison gymnasium, the real nightmare for the Allied authorities was only just beginning. Outside the prison walls, crowds were beginning to gather, drawn by rumor and a morbid curiosity. The Allied command was gripped by a single, overriding fear, that the graves of these men would become shrines. They envisioned neo-Nazi pilgrims making pilgrimages for centuries to come, laying wreaths and turning these mass murderers into martyrs. They had seen how Vladimir Lenin's tomb in Moscow had become a site of secular worship, and how the relics of saints had been venerated for 1,000 years. They knew they could not allow that to happen. These men, who had craved a 1,000-year Reich, could not be allowed a single inch of ground to call their own, not even in death. The order was given. The bodies, and every trace of their existence, had to vanish from the face of the earth. What followed was a secret, meticulously planned operation of erasure. In the dead of night, the 10 corpses along with Goering's were stripped of their clothes. They were photographed one last time, clinical and stark, for the official record. Then their identities were symbolically erased. To be moved, each man was given a false name, an anonymous American alias. The once feared Hermann Goering was tagged as George Munger. Alfred Rosenberg, the Nazi Party's chief ideologue, became Bob Barker. Fake U.S. Army dog tags were created and placed on each body. At 4 in the morning, 2 army trucks rumbled to life. The 11 bodies were sealed in mattress covers and loaded inside, hidden under canvas. Under the cover of darkness and armed guard, a secret convoy began a 2-hour journey south, moving through the shattered, ghost-like landscape of post-war Bavaria. Their destination was a closely guarded secret, a crematorium at a Munich cemetery called Ostfriedhof. Here, the story descends into its most profound and terrible irony. The convoy arrived at the very same crematorium that had for years been used to dispose of the bodies of thousands of victims from a nearby concentration camp. The ovens that had burned those they had persecuted would now burn them. The entire perimeter was sealed by American soldiers armed with machine guns. No one was allowed in or out. The process began. Methodically, one by one, the bodies of the Nazi high command were pushed into the flames. The cremation was an act of physical destruction, but it was also an act of symbolic annihilation. Every personal effect that had been found on them was also destroyed. Goering's ostentatious gold Nazi badge was melted down into a shapeless lump. Medals bearing the swastika were defaced and hammered into unrecognizability before being disposed of. Their uniforms were not burned in one place, but were cut into pieces and scattered to different incinerators across Germany. Their personal letters were turned to ash. In a bizarre and unsettling footnote to the proceedings, it was later discovered that an American doctor present at the cremations had secretly stolen small samples of brain tissue from the bodies before they were burned. But the Allies knew that even ashes could become relics. A handful of dust could be enshrined. So the final step of the plan was the most crucial. Early on the morning of October 17th, a small contingent of American officers drove to a quiet tributary of the Isar River. They carried with them the 11 cardboard boxes containing the ashes. There, on the riverbank, they didn't scatter them ceremoniously. Instead, soldiers smashed the containers with their rifle butts, breaking them into pieces. Then, they threw the dust and the broken cardboard into the fast-flowing water. An unnamed soldier who was there was later quoted as saying, "Let the fish eat them." As the last gray specks dissolved into the current, the physical existence of the architects of the Third Reich was finally and completely extinguished. To ensure the secret held, a sophisticated deception campaign was launched. Fake burial records were created and filed. The international press was officially told that the ashes of the war criminals had been buried at sea. For nearly 50 years, these documents remained classified, and the true story of the Munich crematorium and the Isar River was known only to a handful of men.
Stand charged here today. On Thursday, the 18th of October, 1945, in Berlin,
The truth only began to emerge in the 1990s, when the records were finally declassified. This secret playbook, written in the ashes of Nuremberg, became the grim template for the future. In 2011, when US forces were faced with the body of Osama bin Laden, they followed the Nuremberg solution, a burial at sea, leaving no grave, no marker, and no shrine. The ultimate irony is perhaps the most fitting epitaph. These were men who dreamed of eternal glory, of monuments and empires that would last a millennium. They wanted to be remembered as heroes, legends, and martyrs. Instead, they were given nothing. No grave, no marker, no ceremony, no trace. Their final, humiliating legacy was to be erased from the world so completely that their last resting place was the belly of a fish, forgotten in a muddy river. They became, quite literally, nothing. These are the kinds of hidden histories we are dedicated to uncovering. If you want to ensure you don't miss the next journey into the dark secrets of the past, be sure to subscribe.